Alleluia. Om Mani Padme. Om Allah.
Welcome. You're watching Harmony and Diversity, and today we're speaking to Tommy Canning, and he's a contemporary sacred artist. Thanks for coming in, Tommy. And my first question is going to be, of course, what is a sacred artist?
A sacred artist is an artist who mainly concerns himself with subjects of the divine, of the relating to the divine, especially in my own case, my own context, in the Christian tradition of the Catholic Church, as an artist who paints images for churches, holy places, and today in exhibitions as well, or publications of that nature. So that would be the sort of definition in one sense.
So from that, I take it you're a Catholic, always been a Catholic?
Born and raised as a Catholic, and still a Catholic yet, in spite of myself.
Yes. And so have you always had a tendency towards art and illustration?
Yeah, well, from a very young age, it was very evident that I had artistic ability from childhood, and as I grew up through the, into your teenage years, it was something that I was, very keenly developed and was encouraged by my older brothers and my mother. So it was something that I was always encouraged to do, and at school as well, teachers noticed the talent that I had and very much encouraged and supported me in that, developing and nurturing that talent. And I did so well into my teenage years, and it really began to flourish and blossom then, probably at a very young age. Yeah.
And is that as an illustrator, as you worked?
Yeah, by the mid-teens, I was already starting to develop a real talent as an illustrator. I was very much into comic books and illustration, animation, that kind of thing. And by the age of 19, I had 2 books already published, 2 fully illustrated books by a major publisher in Scotland. So at a young age, without any art training or any formal qualifications or any degrees in art or anything, the talent was being recognised just as what it was, just a raw talent, and they were publishers were willing to give me that chance to show what I could do in a published form. So
it was quite innate. You picked up the pen or the pencil, and
it was just a natural gift that I didn't think anything of it. It was just something I was able to do, and continued to do that, and always probably like all young artists, or even any artist, you're your own worst critic. You're always striving to do better, and that was something I can remember, the frustration at not being able to capture the realism or the reality of a subject well enough for my own liking. Other people would look at it and think, wow, but I was never happy.
No, that's right. It's a state of constant improvement, aspiring. So you mentioned 19. I seem to recall that there was some event, you visited the Vatican, I think it was.
Yeah, well, just after I'd completed work on the second book that I had published, I went on a holiday for a week to Rome with my mother and 2 older brothers, and that experience was to have a profound impact on me for the rest of my life, really. But it was the beginning of an awakening to the realities that probably I'd taken for granted as a Catholic, born and raised, and gone through Catholic education, and sort of went through the hoops, as it were, of all the, checking all the things on the list that you do as a Catholic growing up, going through all the sacraments and Catholic education, but never really embracing the faith as my own, really. It wasn't. I was probably, like typical of many of my own generation, largely indifferent and lukewarm towards it. So it wasn't the centre of my life. But when that experience in Rome really began to put the first seeds of that awakening into me, and then that was the sort of beginning for me. I can always trace it back to that experience of the exposure to the great art and basilicas and architecture of Rome. Had a profound artistic impact on me, also spiritually as well. It sort of developed from there.
Was there any one particular painting or location which really was the apex
I
of
think it was just a cumulative thing. It was, you know, all of the whole experience, going into one church after another, literally spending hours. I could have spent a whole day easily just studying and being, you know, really impacted on many levels, artistically, culturally, historically. It was a real lesson about a lot of things. It really, sometimes that's what they call the great churches, their sermons in stone. They speak to us about truths and realities that, you know, the divine realities beyond this temporal world. And it was like a realization or an epiphany for me that only God, who is real, who is the creator of all things, creator and author of all beauty, all truth and goodness, could inspire the artisans that created and engineered these great churches and magnificent art, which were centuries and centuries old.
Yes.
Sometimes painted in what would be known as the Dark Ages, in quotes, you know, the Dark Ages.
That's right.
And yet, you know, such great technical, artistic ability and theological understanding. Many of these artists weren't just gifted artists, they also had a great theological grasp of the faith beyond many people's, you know, comprehension. So these people were profound thinkers as well. They had a great grasp of many complex theological abstract concepts, and could distill them and put them into a visual form, which formed a sort of catechetical tool for generations of faithful who probably at that time could neither read nor write. So these were the ways in which the church used for centuries to communicate the truths of its faith. So yeah, that really impacted me. The realization of this really hit home to me, that everything I thought I knew at that point really was, I had to re-examine and sort of literally go back to the drawing board and rethink what direction I wanted to go in as an artist, because this seemed to me to speak to a higher calling, a higher goal. And for me, it just seemed that the natural way to go is to strive for the highest good, rather than just a successful career as a commercial or artist or painter. I wanted to do more than that. And this seemed to fulfill that desire, that restlessness that was within me.
Yes, those paintings of which you speak are loaded with symbolism, and as you said, they communicate in the most detailed ways. And we need to communicate in the most detailed ways because time ticks, so we'll go to a break. We'll be back in a moment. Welcome back. You're watching Harmony and Diversity, and we're speaking with Tommy Canning, a contemporary sacred artist. Tommy, before the break we were talking about how Sistine Chapel and those locations inspired you so much. In those paintings, of course, there's a lot of symbolism, like a lamp placed here and someone with their right hand instead of their left hand, all of those sorts of symbols. Do you find that comes into your paintings at all?
Yeah, very much so. It's something that you're at times conscious of, because you want to try to reinforce the message or the point or the concept behind the painting. So certain things are done with a conscious idea of reinforcing that, underlining or everything drawing you to a central point.
Yes.
Other times it's done almost subconsciously. It's not a consciously decided action. It's almost in the intuitive sense that you just have of doing certain things unknowingly, but later you see this sort of, there's a flow of creativity that sometimes has its own way that you're absolutely unaware of or not in control of, which I think is oftentimes what, you know, the divine spark, you know.
Yes.
Is J.R.R. Tolkien, the great writer of the Lord of the Rings novels, that he was a Catholic himself, a daily communicant. He called the artist or a sub-creator. That we are like, God is the ultimate, He is the creator, but we are all in our sort of sub-creators in our own realms that we dwell in, and that is something that we share in, not because we are like God, but God condescends and gives us that grace that we just sort of are the tools by which God is working through, and we don't always are aware of that. And it's a great saying that, that a work of art is a collaboration between God and the artist, and the less the artist does, the better. And that's something that when I see any good that comes from anything I've done, or something that has a pleasing aesthetic appeal to it, I feel that's really the work that God has intended to place within there. I'm merely the blunt instrument, the blunt pencil in his hand.
That's right. So the conduit, if you like.
Yeah.
Yes. So with that richness of your interpretation of the divine and the sacred illustration, after your 19-year-old experience and your visit to the Vatican, there was a few other events inspired you.
Yeah, it was a sort of process, a gradual process of, a maturing process. You're growing from childhood or adolescence into your manhood. So you're maturing as a young adult, and so you're starting to grapple with bigger questions, more weightier subjects. And that was part of the process. So that experience then sort of set me on the path towards wanting to know more about this faith that I had been raised in since a child and been taken for granted, and to really, fully enjoy and explore the great heritage and treasure we have in our tradition of the Catholic Church. And so in so doing that, I read many books, encountered many materials that really fed and nurtured that hunger and thirst that I had to learn and to know more. And during that process, just by chance or coincidence, whatever, if you want to call it that, I picked up a leaflet on the message and devotion of Divine Mercy as revealed to Sister Faustina Kowalska, the Polish nun that had these mystical experiences in the 1930s with our Lord, and who revealed great revelations and insights into the God's greatest attribute, as the Church calls it, His mercy. And I read through that leaflet, and it really had a profound awakening and deepening of this great gift that God has given us, His divine mercy, and it really would inform and shape a lot of the artwork, the sacred art that I would do in the years to come. And it was particularly a statement that our Lord allegedly had given to Saint Faustina when He first appeared in an apparition as the image of divine mercy. He came in a white long tunic with an opening at the breast, and He opened the breast, and with His other hand was raised in the gesture of blessing and a benediction. And from His heart, which we know was pierced by the lance of the soldier on Good Friday when He died on the cross, blood and water issued forth.
Yes.
And it took the symbolic form in this image of rays of light, red rays and pale rays. And Jesus uttered these words to this Polish nun, who wasn't an artist. She was a religious nun in a congregation and occupied no place of importance. And yet He told her, paint an image according to the pattern you see with the signature, Jesus, I trust in you. And just that statement fascinated me. It really intrigued me and fascinated me to think that our Lord would condescend and would ask for this nun, who had no artistic ability whatsoever, to paint an image according to the patterns she saw. Eventually she, through her spiritual director, she got a painter, an artist, and the image was eventually painted, and subsequently there's been many versions of that image done. But for me, those words resonated very deeply, and it was like our Lord was saying to me as an artist, you have this gift, you have this talent which I have given you, paint an image according to the pattern you see. And they kind of haunted me. I wouldn't say haunted is the right word, but they continually followed me.
Yes.
And really gave me a sense of where I wanted to go with the art.
So have you actually rendered that particular Sister Faustina.
Yes, I have.
Yeah,
I've actually
yeah.
painted my own version of that based on her descriptions and the many theological works that have been written about the image. It's full of symbolism. It's very rich in symbolism with a lot of meaning. So I've studied that a lot and tried to do an image which I hope will be a little contribution to that tradition of images of Christ.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so after the break we'll discuss this a bit further, because I'd like to examine how you actually felt when you were painting that particular image. Was there a more intense connection? But we'll be out of time if we go further, so we'll be back in a moment. Welcome back. You're watching Harmony in Diversity, and we're speaking with Tommy Canning, and he's a contemporary sacred artist. And we're actually talking about the image given to Sister Faustina, and you have painted it yourself. How did it feel painting that? Was it the same as any other painting, or of your religious paintings, that is, or was it something special about painting that?
Yeah, it's a very difficult one to paint because there's the history. There's many well-known images in the history of that particular devotion. It's a more contemporary devotion within the Catholic Church, going back to the 1930s when the revelations were first given. So, as an artist, you're very conscious of what's gone before, and there's a few images which are very much beloved by many people and are very well known throughout the world. So a challenge as an artist is to try and do something that doesn't destroy that image which has gone before, or it tries to build on what's gone before and do something that's maybe a little different, a little bit more personal to my own particular style and approach, but still faithful to that. That isn't too different from what's gone previously. And so for me it was very challenging painting to do, but very, very much satisfying, because I was very pleased with the outcome, and the reaction from many people who have seen it so far has been a confirmation that I've perhaps been able to do a good rendition of it and a contribution towards that particular image. So it was very enjoyable, but at the same time very challenging. It's like a fine balance between trying to get something that's a little bit original into the content, but be faithful to it. And it's very specific. Yes. Everything has particular meaning within the image. The iconography of it, it's in a sense almost like a sacred icon, which is a tradition of the Church of the East, the Orthodox churches. And so there's certain things which have to be, certain conventions you have to work within. So you can't really stray too far away from those confines. Explain
in the terms of non-artistic people what those conventions are, and also people who may not understand the Catholic implications of it.
Well, it has to conform to a certain the particular elements which have to be included in the depiction, because it's it is conveying truth, or it's a symbol or a representation of a religious truth. So there has to be a very particular adherence to those rules, as it were. And the symbolism within the image itself is very rich. It's very deep, and many implications for Catholics or people who look upon the image. In itself, it's not the object of our worship. It's merely a representation. We don't worship the image. No. It's like a photograph of a loved one. It's not the person, but it's the person the photograph represents. So that's we try, and we're always conscious of that. So within the image itself, they have the red and pale rays, which represent the blood and water which came from the side of Christ when his side was pierced by the Roman soldier's lance on Good Friday. It also represents, those two rays represents the Eucharist, which is for the Catholics, that is something which is very dear to our religious worship. It's the source and summit of our faith, where we believe that Jesus is truly present in body, blood, soul and divinity in the sacred host. And every Mass we receive our Lord in Holy Communion. So the red rays represent the Eucharist, his body, blood, soul and divinity. The water represents baptism, and also the Holy Spirit, which we receive in the sacrament of confirmation and also in baptism. And also it's the risen Christ. Christ is in the image depicted as the resurrected Jesus on Easter Sunday. The Feast of Divine Mercy, which Jesus is also integral to the message given to Saint Faustina. He called for a Feast of Divine Mercy, which is to be celebrated on the first Sunday after Easter, because on that day he appeared to the apostles in the upper room and he gave them the power to forgive sins, and he uttered the words, "Peace be with you." Almost as we see described in the image of Divine Mercy as he appeared to Saint Faustina. So he wanted that connection to be made between that 8th day and his appearance to the apostles, and he's granting mercy, the power to forgive sins, and that's a very important part of the message. It's a reminder to us that God is a God of mercy, and we are to become that which we behold in the image, so that through our contemplation of this image, we then are slowly transformed into living images of divine mercy to those that we encounter around us, so that we then become images to others, passing on that mercy through our contemplation of the image. And Jesus said to Faustina, he gave many, many promises, but one thing that he did insist upon, because when Faustina was trying to paint have the original image painted, and some artist was conscripted to do this, she was never satisfied with the outcome, because to her, what she saw Jesus appear to her like, the beauty couldn't compare. No. And she suffered greatly over this, and she actually wept and said, "Lord, who will paint you as beautiful as you are?" And he said, "It is not in the beauty of the colour or the brush that lies the power of this mercy, but in my grace." So the image itself is like a conduit. It's a vessel, as he calls it, through which his grace can come through. But we are, according to our receptivity as individuals. And so it's a powerful, powerful image. It's like a triple exposure image. All the events of the Passion of Christ are present. The wounds in his hand, his pierced side, his wounded feet. But he's the risen Christ in glory, and he imparts mercy, not condemnation.
I can understand how daunting it must have been to paint that painting, Tommy.
Oh, very much.
We're out of time, but would you come back next week and we can talk more about this fascinating topic?
Certainly, I would love to.
Thanks for watching. We'll be back next week with another interview with Tommy Canning.
Baha'u'llah, Shanti Om, Allahu